Welcome back to the Vitality Brotherhood podcast. My name is Jim Laird. Here at the Vitality Brotherhood, our goal is to help you restore your vitality and to maintain or enhance your vitality as you age over the age of 40. Today, I'm joined by Kris Freeman. And if you don't know Kris, you need to go on YouTube and search Jim Laird and Kris Freeman, and it'll pop up an interview we did, 5-6 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe longer than that. But basically, Kris is a former recon Marine, and the one thing I've learned about Marines is once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine. They tend to learn how to turn the volume down a little bit over time, but you're pretty much always a Marine. And Kris overcame a devastating injury that he suffered in Iraq. And we went through in great detail his journey and his process through that. So if you're in a really bad place, I would highly suggest going back and listening to that interview. It's probably the best interview I've ever done as far as just overall content and flow. I just really enjoyed it. And Kris has been a good friend. I've known him since he was, a young kid. So it's been fun to watch his evolution. Kris, let's talk a little bit about, you're a coach now. Let's talk about your evolution as a coach and some of the challenges you faced with training ideology and, changing gyms and clientele and finding a coaching style and a coaching environment that really suits your needs.
Sure. So kind of like everybody else, I started off with like a real baseline certification through the ISSA. I did a distance learning course while I was getting out of the Marine Corps. I needed to fill some time gaps. And pretty quickly, as soon as I EAS'd, when your active service is up, I got right into my first personal training job at Urban Active Fitness, which was a local gym here in Lexington, Kentucky. And they just started feeding me clients. So I had to learn how to do my job. So just because you have a certification, as many people know, doesn't make you qualified to work with people in person. Certainly not coach them to the degree that they need.
Sure.
But they started giving me all the older clients. We're talking like, 70, 80 years old. And I was like, what's with this? And I realized it was because I was not hurting them. So it's not that I was making them that much better. They just weren't complaining to the staff or management that they were getting hurt by the trainers. So it's not like I was doing a fantastic job. That was the start of me finding my niche unintentionally. And then it circled back around years later. But to fill in the gap, spent some time at CrossFit, a few different CrossFit facilities. And I enjoyed the variety of training. I think it probably speaks to a lot of people with exercise ADD. It's, so prevalent today. You want that. It's like entertainment fitness.
Yeah.
Right. One thing that I did learn was the community aspect and people sweating with other people and sharing in that, that collective effort was a really good thing to have around. And it drew people in, and those connections increased the longevity of their attachment to the training facility. So I said, okay, how can we take this community aspect, make the training a little smarter, dial it back, still keep people engaged in their training. And that was when I was personally getting more into strength training, powerlifting, into starting strength and Mark Ripito, when I was a big reader of Elite FTS and Dave Tate. Got huge into Jim Wendler. Still love all his stuff. And it's talk about evolution over the years. It's neat to see his change philosophy and still anchored to his core and his, his list that he likes to include in his training. But all that aside, in 2013, I went out on my own. We had a little bit of a coming blue to CrossFit. First coach to depart. At that time, I was the head coach and programmer. Jim's smiling behind the coffee mug because he knows how that went down, and it was not a very good transition. It was a get the fuck out type of an experience for me, and I was kind of shocked because I'm a pretty nice guy, despite my background. I'm a pretty easygoing guy. So that fired me. It was the fire that I needed under my ass to make a leap to another gym, and I started doing. Training was me, all the billing was me, the invoicing, so it all became like my entity, and I did the sole proprietor thing for a while. That worked. It was a really nice gym. Everything you could want to use with your clients, and decent visibility. I never got a whole lot of like walk-ins there, but when our son was born in late 2016, my son Odin, Ode to Valhalla. And he was born. I started inviting clients out to the house because we had a garage gym with a platform, plates, and I had some kettlebell stuff that I accumulated over the years. And people really liked the privacy of it. It was, at that time, the garage was disgusting. It was very unfinished. Had a rack of like storage stuff from the previous owners. It was just a total mess. And I was just floored that people would want to come out and train. And I think a big part of it now, looking back, was that I was more comfortable because it was my home environment. I had my music. I could really just be in a great workflow for several hours at a time and not feel like I was kind of overrun, overstressed out, compromising my moral integrity with stuff that I didn't agree with coaching. So that's kind of how it's transitioned now until we have more of a home-based facility. And we do, private and small group coaching, home gym, which we've continued to add gear to over the years. It's kind of a nice place. Most of the year it's open air, even into the fall. Usually when it starts to get into the 40s, we start closing the door down, but people are very understanding about the temperature variance. And I tell them it's part of the deal of being a human. You have to be resilient enough in hot or cool temperatures. So we have fans that circulate air in the summer. We provide, element electrolytes to all our clients, and we've had no issues with the heat. And I've got clients, my oldest client right now is 89.
Cool. Yeah, I just had Rob actually on the first Rob Wolf on the first episode of this. I'm gonna back you up a little bit. You said you didn't hurt anybody, and that's really the number one. That's what the doctors are supposed to be. It's like do no harm is supposed to be the number one thing. So you actually were doing your job. The number one job of a coach or a trainer is not to hurt your client. So that's actually speaks a lot for your ability to adapt to the person you're training. And I've known you through the whole process. And I was at that same gym that you got abruptly booted out of. I was also abruptly booted out of there too. Well, not so abrupt. I saw it coming, but we realized that not everybody needs to be doing barbell back squats. Not everybody needs to be doing barbell snatches. People need to be trained according to their goals and according to their abilities. And most people, a lot of people in the training space expect their clients to perform like an elite athlete. They don't have the time to do that. No. So my hat's off to you. And everybody kind of we all have these different, experts or, I guess I fall into that category as well. And so do you, that are like, hey, you need to train like this. But I've always, I think you've known me long enough to know that I don't marry myself to a particular method. Right. I look at principles and I take principles from all of those different people and different modalities, and I blend them into what the client needs. And that's, that's really what it's all about in the end. Talk about what you go through, like your process. I have a certain process when I have major changes that kind of punch me in the face. When you got abruptly, I think I was one of the first people that you called when that happened. Because I kind of gave you a little heads up on it, but what is your process when you have something that just punches you in the mouth? What is your process that you go through to get yourself back on the right track?
I guess this is the first time I remember thinking about my process, really. I don't know. I don't focus on the downsides, I guess.
Yeah.
Theories. And it's because it's not like I selectively block them out. It's just not part of how I psychologically deal with problems.
Sure.
So sometimes that can come back to later on, and I realize maybe you need to spend some time with those negative emotions more. But largely, I try to be positive, and I looked at it like, you know what? This is not the time that I planned on doing this, but I had aspirations to go out on my own for a while. Sure. And I knew a simple setup to start. I actually used Rob's software and still do for my client, Fight 13. And I have for the last 11 years. So I kept it real simple. Obviously, it doesn't have to be that complicated. Over the years, added layers to things that we provide for clients. Now we're lucky enough that we have a downstairs facility in our home where we can give people more access to recovery elements they wouldn't normally have access to, like infrared sauna, and we have a Odin ice bath from Australia.
Nice.
So we really try to push those on people because they're at such a deficit in recovery anyways. That's what ultimately holds people back from achieving their desired level of fitness or strength or mobility, is they just get too beat up, whether it's age or it's hormone or it's poor environment, unclean home or poor sleep hygiene. All those things compound. So anything that we can add in to make your body work more harmoniously, we try to do that. So holistic strength, and we talk a lot about nutrition, rest and recovery. I like people to train hard. Like we've talked about many times before, you have to pay to play. And in today's environment, people don't have the work capacity they once did. So you're always having to work backwards and trying to restore that basic capacity. And they recover like shit because the food that we have access to, it's easier to make poor food choices. We're inundated daily by like these little dopamine hit activities on our phones and ding, ding, ding. We can't really be mindful. The first time I tried to work on like just being, it was like, it was anxiety inducing, just sitting still. So, and that's something I still do to this day. I do. I'm back to doing it every day. What I've learned about myself, if I want to work on something and I've got some other projects I'm working on, they have to happen first thing in the morning before interruption.
That's a great thing to learn about yourself. I forgot to ask before we started, do you have a hard time stop on this?
Do you have a hard time what?
Time stop. Do you have like a time you have to be done on this? Because you know how we are. We get talking. We'll probably be here all day. So I just want to make sure.
Around an hour or so.
Okay, perfect. Great. What happens to me when I end in a situation where I've had an abrupt change is I usually have a little bit of rage, a little bit of anger, and then I look within myself and I kind of do an inventory of like, okay, this is the reasons I've been given that this has happened. Are some of these things true? And usually there is an element of truth to some of them. So I look at myself first. And then usually after a day or two of just like, usually I won't sleep. That's just kind of how I'm wired. Like if I lost a wrestling match or a football game, I would literally go over it in my mind over and over again. And like, why did I lose? Well, I didn't sink my hip enough on that hip toss, or, I didn't get my hooks in deep enough on that gut, whatever I was doing. And it would bother me. And then I'd put it behind me and I'd look at it as a way for me to improve. That's how I've always kind of done these things. And as I've gotten older, I realized that a lot of these things are basically, it ends up being better for you in the long run. But I take 1 or 2 days to kind of process things. And then I kind of just, things kind of bubble up within me. And then I just kind of take charge and move forward. What talk about your like, obviously, could you give like a quick brief summary of the injuries you sustained in Iraq? And then let's talk about your training as a person, how it's evolved. Oh, one point before I've got ADD this morning, but you talked about how, training hard. What people don't understand about that is everybody's definition of training hard is different. If you got a 70-year-old lady, a 4-minute floor-based warm-up and 3 sets of 8 on a sit down in a chair and stand up might be her definition of working hard. And that changes as your work capacity changes and as you adapt. So you got to understand. That's why, when I start with people, and I know you're the same way, we start with very little because we don't know what that person's going to, I've had people do, like you've seen the Parisi style warm up I do with people before I train them. I've had people go through that warm up 3 or 4 times and not be able to walk for 4 days. And in my mind, I'm just like, wow, like this is crazy, but that's where they are. Right. So talk to us a little bit about your injuries and then give us kind of an overview of how your training has changed and what you've learned about your body and what you have to do to get yourself feeling better.
Yeah. And I just hosted 12 other recon Marines at our home a couple weekends ago. So we talked a
Good
little
for
bit.
You.
I appreciate that. That was an amazing experience. A lot of these guys I had not seen at all since 2007, 2008, when everybody was getting out. So yeah, it was incredible. to be around in the presence of those guys. And just a great reminder about that community, how tight-knit we all are, especially the guys that made those deployments in 05, 06. Some really rough times, but a little sidetrack there. My injuries, I was in an IED blast. Our Humvee, I was the driver, and our Humvee was struck by a pressure plate IED. If you're not familiar with that terminology, they basically use the weight of the vehicle to detonate the blast, which is very creative and very deadly because it's precisely under the center of the truck most of the times. And so I got blasted. My whole right side was affected. So I got pitched out. The driver's side door was blown off. If you know anything about up armored Humvees, those doors are heavier than hell. So the fact that I got blown out, one, it was a blessing because it blow my eardrums out of my head. And I had Peltor cans on, so that preserved most of my hearing. And but the orthopedic injuries on everything was zipped up in the bag, so to speak. I didn't have any compound fractures, but everything was busted. I had 5 fractures in my femur. I had 3 fractures in my tibia, broke my fibula. The radius and ulna were broken in my right arm, and I shattered my elbow. The electron arm process was kind of crushed by the blast. And then the icing on the cake was the moderate traumatic brain injury, which didn't feel very moderate to me at the time, and still gives me continued issues. You know, your brain does heal, and you make new neurons and new motor pathways in the right circumstances and environment, but it's a lot for me to overcome on a daily basis. So yeah, all those I was non-weight bearing on my right leg for 4 months. So I did a lot of swimming early on as part of my rehab, and I did outpatient physical therapy for about 6 months at a local hospital here in Lexington, Kentucky. That they did a great job with me. And then I returned to base and tried to continue to train for the next deployment. As crazy as that sounds, that was like my, you talk about anger being your first, go-to, or frustration at the very least. And that's kind of the headspace I was living in. I was very down, very, very depressed. Didn't understand my place or my role anymore. My identity with my job was immediately removed. And I felt like I let down my brothers because I was no longer along their side, watching their 6. And I talked to my buddy Kris, who survived this blast also. We had that same feeling, which since I've been able to work through a little more, but it's really hard to just, in an instant, be removed from all that. And probably the best part was that I have amnesia about my injuries. I don't remember anything that happened during the blast or immediately after. There's like 2 to 3 days where it's totally blank. So at the very least, I don't have visuals to, attach to memory.
The brain is very good at protecting itself from things that are way, way overwhelming. I don't know if you've ever read The Body Keeps the Score, but
I have that book. That's on my next. I'm reading a couple other books right now in the mornings. Yeah. That's what I'm going to read because my sister's been telling me to read that for years.
That book, it just, I mean, there was parts of that book where I got sick to my stomach because some of the stuff that people had gone through, like in that book, it just is gut wrenching. So it gave me hope that these people who'd been through, like, some of the shit in that book is deep, like insane, like stuff you couldn't even imagine. Like one woman waking up on the operating table while they're burning her fallopian tubes out. Like she woke up enough to be conscious, but not to be able to do or say anything. So she felt it and experienced the whole surgery, but she couldn't let them know that she was awake. I mean, just think about how awful that would be, right? And then having, and some of the others, like the sexual assaults and some of the other crazy stuff that went on, it gave me hope that, and the thing that really helped me about that book was understanding some of the things I had been through and learning the different coping mechanisms. Like there's things I've struggled with my entire life that all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this isn't because I'm necessarily a bad person. This is because I had some shit happen to me that was not very good. And these are the things that I've done to cope with it. which made it a lot easier, because then when I struggle with that, it's like, okay, this is something, I grew up in a really religious home, so there was a lot of guilt involved with certain habits, right? And so that made it easier to say, hey, well, I just got to go back and deal with some of this stuff, and these coping mechanisms will become more manageable. I don't think they ever completely go away. But yeah, it's crazy. Just let's take a little side note before we get into how your training's adapted. I know you won't take this question the wrong way, but I think it's pretty common knowledge now that I've talked to a lot of operators. I'm friends with a lot of special forces guys, and the consensus is that we shouldn't have been over there in the first place, right? And how are you and your friends dealing with the fact that everything that you went through was essentially a lie? Like, how has that affected? I know a lot of Vietnam guys, and same with Vietnam. Vietnam was a giant lie, based on, the true history that's coming out now. And I know I've talked to a lot of veterans about this, and they're just like, what has that done to you mentally? And how are you guys like banding together to kind of deal with the fact that you basically were lied to?
Yeah. What's interesting, I'm just minimizing those up top. What's interesting is that did not come up. All the side conversations I had with my buddies over, the weekend, that did not come up one time. If you can believe that, the bitterness about the situations we were put in, which were not right and not for the right. I don't know why. That's been something that I personally haven't really dwelled on for any length of time. It makes me angry that we were misused, because we were a really good, strong unit. And what we were doing over there was just total bullshit. So it's not that our acts were in vain, because it's ultimately about the guy to your right. It's about protecting your crew. But the area that we were put in and the missions that we were tasked out with feel essentially meaningless at times.
Yeah.
So go
ahead. I'm not insinuating you did anything wrong. I'm insinuating that the people at the top are just jackasses, right? And you guys are doing your job. You're doing your duty. You're put into a situation where you have to do what you got to do. And I understand that completely. It's just poor, leadership that has all the wrong intentions. And so, that's my point on that. Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's just the thing, is that when when you enlist and you're 17, 18 years old, you don't have the full scope of what you're signing up for. I don't play that victim mentality bullshit either. So it's not to say that. That you know the true intentions behind the government and why they're trying to make certain moves, why they're putting you in certain hostile environments, what they tell you, what's coming down from higher up versus what is actually happening at the top. That's, from that aspect, it's very terrible and very frustrating, for sure. And the administration, currently and in the past, again, it's a misuse, an extreme misuse of resources, in my opinion. It's not that we have to be pacifists,
right?
That not good reasons to fight or go to war or to guard yourself, but at the same time, thousands of guys are getting injured and killed. You don't really
it's an abuse. It's an abuse of the services. The military is there to protect us from foreign invasion, from direct attacks on the United States. It's not meant to be, going out and changing other governments, and like that's not how the founding fathers set this thing up. But let's steer back to you. That's a conversation we could have for a long time, and it would probably get us banned from all social media at this point. That's really funny. I'll tell you this quick story. We were doing a question and answer session with Dr. Stillman in one of our coaching programs, and somebody asked him about the regular certain type of application that people have been taking for years for, when you get the sniffles and stuff, right? And they asked, like, is it worth taking that? And he was like, well, there's no real evidence that really does anything. And really there's no real upside to it. And he used other words. it was unlisted on YouTube, and it was taken down immediately as soon as we put it on the question and answers on YouTube unlisted so we can get the transcript from it. They deleted it from YouTube, and it wasn't even listed. It wasn't even public. That's how dystopian things are getting now. So, side note. So you literally come out of this rehab, and then I remember you doing some CrossFit stuff. It beat you up a ton. And I remember you experimenting with different things. I need to get really, really strong. And then, pivoting all over the place. How did that journey work? And what have you learned? I guess that would be over the last, I don't know how many years, is it a decade now?
Yeah.
What have you learned about what you need to do to be in a good place and to feel good and to basically make up for some of the damages that you've had done to you?
Yeah, so it's been kind of like an 18-year evolution from direct, physical therapy, to strength training, from CrossFit, kettlebell work, powerlifting, and probably the last 3 years, I've been more focused on what Athletic Truth Group is getting into, which is just it's not new information. Charles Poliquin is where they dawned a lot of their inspiration. They were just able to template and offer very clear, concise ways to regress and progress positions. But a lot of long-range strength training for me has been huge because, fortunately, one thing that barbell training did for me was develop a huge base of strength. But ultimately, I was limited by, the way that my body is, asymmetrical through the hips, through my spine, through my shoulders. And those positions are not very forgiving when you have, orthopedic issues. So what I had to evolve to was less like heavy strength training and more about strengthening positions where I don't feel very resilient in. So a good example for me would be, instead of doing like heavier bilateral squats, usually once, twice a week, I'll do heavier, not heavier, more body weight related ATG split squats. I don't know if you've seen those.
Yes,
So
I have.
it looks like you'd snap sit of your knee, or tear your flexor when you see people doing like the more advanced progressions. But you also have to realize, like, as long as you can start at an appropriate level, it's doable for anybody. Yep. And that's what I show people, how you can build into these exercises, but you can start at a level. So I do a ton of sled. That's gotten more over the years, pushing and pulling the sled back has been amazing for my knees. I do a lot of long range split squats. I do deep squats on a slant board now, which more forgiving for my hips to squat deeper with a pause, and I've got more control than stopping, range squat essentially like you would with a barbell. Front back loaded. And then for my shoulders, I just stopped doing straight bar bench press because it was beating my elbows up so badly. And the big Valsalvas also were making me so stiff and rigid. So one thing that I took out back squats is my waist started to shrink and shrink and shrink. And I started to lose fat around like my, love handles and my hips and my obliques. And my core was still strong, but I didn't have to be so damn wide to accommodate those positions anymore. So I'll still deadlift from time to time just because it's fun and I can get away with doing it. I've got good leverages for that exercise, and it just brings me joy to pull some heavier weights, but nothing compared to what I was doing. But the long range strength training has been the best that's happened to me. From my joints feel better. They are way more resistant to being cranked on in jiu-jitsu. Only surprise people by how my shoulders can rotate. I'm still working on my hip mobility at all times. But I'd never really thought about combining weights in a stretch position before this program. So right now I'm going through the process, my level 1 and 2 through ATG, but that's probably been the most positive change for my program because everything feels really good while you're doing it. You're not like, oh, my shoulder's nagging, kind of get by. Nothing feels like that in my training. And it brings me so much joy, and it gives me positive energy, and it's easier to recover from, that I want to train more often. And I can train more often because I'm shit kicked out of myself.
Sure. Well, that's one thing people have a hard time understanding is managing strategy, right? And when you limit yourself to the barbell lifts, you start limiting the strategies that you have available to you because you're adapting to those barbell lifts. So by incorporating things that put you in different positions gives you more movement options, which makes you a better mover. And
Exactly.
that's basically what it comes down to. And you can use all sorts of different modalities to do that. Um, and then obviously people that are, obviously this show is for men over 40, so there's not going to be a lot of ultra bendy men over 40. But you can take it to the other extreme where you've got somebody who's like a yogi who's got too much laxity, right? So, kudos for you for self-experimentation and figuring that out. And a lot of people don't understand that if you do heavy bench presses long enough, you're going to adapt in a way that's going to take away other options. So you have to incorporate things that restore movement options. And that's really great that you figured that out. And most people never do. And the nice thing about figuring that out for yourself is you can also incorporate these things you've learned with your clients as well.
Yeah, and immediately once when I find things that are affecting me profoundly like that, I just can't. It's like can't help but share, and then start to figure out better ways to do that process. So,
Yep.
Largely what we're doing now. We have different blocks of training through the year, but that's kind of a
Mhm.
constant. Like even if we're doing some barbell movements in our groups or privates,
Mhm.
we're also doing lots of things to increase movement variability and mobility and
Yep.
resilience in positions where you normally wouldn't be very strong. So
Sure.
people have longevity in those positions.
That's awesome. So let's talk about your brain injury. I haven't been blown up in a vehicle, but I've been in multiple motorcycle accidents, car accidents,
Yeah.
years of fighting and football. Um, so I've struggled with a lot of the same things you've struggled with. What kind of modalities have you done? And the main thing is I want people to get across from this is like when you have something like you've had where you've had a significant injury or some of the things I've been through, this is it's not a one and done thing. This is a process where you're constantly have to manage this, right? So
Right.
what are some of the things you've done to manage your head trauma um, so that you can be a more effective parent, you can be a more effective coach? I think one of the things that was wise to you is working at home and being able to work less, because obviously with your head injury, and I can be attest to this, it's just much harder to manage stress with a head injury. It's much harder to keep yourself calm. It's much easier to go into a state of anxiety, you know, um, and not be able to think and function when you've got a head injury. So, what are some of the things you've done to manage your head injury?
So the first thing I got a book called the TBI Workbook initially, and it was about creating consistency in your patterns and your routines, so you have less cognitive energy going towards meaningless tasks, because you
Right.
can really put a lot of your energy on stuff that doesn't really matter. Uh, Finding your car keys, for example, or your
Hmm.
wallet. Everything has a place. And I'm far from the most organized person. Again, I don't think that I ever was, but the brain injury certainly made that worse. I have trouble with that, but I do have a home for key things in my life, and a big one is like keys, wallet, phone stay in the same places. Um, I like to have structure to my day. I always have. I've always liked getting up early and being able to achieve a few things before anybody else wakes up. Distractions are really hard for me, and that's one of the biggest challenges with children. They can cause
Yeah.
frustration, constantly get taken away from your track. And I've learned to be okay with that and make peace with that. But there's also certain times where I have to separate so that I can get some stuff done. So I find those windows. The sleep piece was very, very crucial for me and still is. And like you talked about, it's always a work in progress. Right now, I'm probably sleeping between 6 and 7 hours, but there's times when I'll sleep, more like in the 8 or 9 hour window, depending on
Hmm.
what's going on. The more consistent my sleep is, the better my brain function is. And that would be true with anybody, but especially if you've had a head injury. That's your only time to rest and reorganize your thoughts, and your brain waves regulate. It's just such a huge piece you can't not talk about. Nutrition for me has been huge. Quality nutrition, nutrient density. Those are like when I think about what I'm going to eat, I try to pack the most nutrients into each meal or snack.
Hmm.
I generally do better with eating a little less now than I used to.
Yeah.
The more starch I have, the more brain fog that I have to deal with, the more fatigue that I deal with. You know, proteins and fats are mostly what I consume now, and I definitely do some fruits, quite a bit of fruits, and some sourdough,
Mm-hmm.
you know, stuff like that. But you know, other things that I've done, I did a session this morning, 15 minutes. I do Wim Hof breath work mostly every day, and that's my form of active meditation. Is all that it is. You know, people can say that it can do some spectacular things for people, probably because they believe so strongly. So if you believe in something, you can really get some great results. But if you just look at, I track stuff on my Whoop, I can see what my heart rate does during my breathing session, and I can see
Mm-hmm.
how it dropped into the high 40s before. So you
Mm-hmm.
can't. That's not going to affect you for the rest of the day. It certainly can
Sure.
impact your resilience to stress. So, you know, when you're bombarded with, you know, your checklist of things that are never being done, and maybe your kids are driving you crazy, or your work is particularly stressful, everything that happens after that breathwork session has a lower impact on your nervous system, and your
Mm-hmm.
ability to relieve stress is lowered. Um, Ice baths in the same wave. I kind of found them both at the same time. The breath work
Mm-hmm.
before the bath, it's an entirely different experience than when you get in there, and you can see what your heart rate does. Very quickly
Mm-hmm.
it drops, and it can drop again into like the low 50s, high 40s for me if I can get my breath under control very well. You know, first off the bat. But for the rest of the day, again, things don't seem to bother me quite as much, and I'm a lot sharper.
That's the one thing I've noticed from working with, hundreds of clients over time. Sorry, my food just came out early. Um, is with the, tracking people with the Aura Ring and things like that. The people that take 10 minutes to just do some, non-sleep deep rest, or some, even just sitting quietly, breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth for a few minutes, they do so much better. And it's only 10 minutes. Even people that just go for a 10-minute walk, breathing through their nose the entire time and just making it an observation exercise, they do so much better. It's the people that don't do any quiet time at all that end up getting themselves in trouble, because they get into this loop that they can't get out of. So it's great for you to be self-aware, and the amount of patience it takes to raise children is incredibly, I know this is I don't have children of my own, but I know this as a former elementary school teacher, and then also training, hundreds of kids over the last 25 years. I couldn't imagine, training clients and having a family, and all these things. So my kudos to you for you to manage yourself, to have the self-awareness enough to maybe, hey, I need to step away and I need to gather myself before I, insert myself into things. Um, Talk about, have you done any HRT or anything like that? Because I know, with brain injuries, one of the biggest issues, my puppy's trying to get my food. One of the biggest issues with brain injuries is your hormone production just goes to shit. So have you done any HRT or anything like that to kind of help you out?
Yeah, that was. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was another huge advantage. So I would get blood work done, you know, infrequently, maybe once every year or two, just from primary
Mm-hmm.
care. And at one point, I was seeing an endocrinologist for something else, and that's when it was brought to my attention. Man, your testosterone levels are pretty low. How are you feeling right now? And I was like,
Yeah.
honestly, I kind of feel like shit, and I've been feeling like shit for a long time. It was about
Yeah.
10 years before I addressed the hormone component, because
Yeah.
the assumption was, if I get all my lifestyle ducks in a row, that my levels will eventually come back online. And there were some things that I probably could have done before. For example, my uh, I didn't start using a CPAP until after I was on hormone therapy, because it
Yeah.
wasn't on anybody's radar that I had obstructive sleep apnea.
Mm-hmm.
That was caused me to stop breathing 10, 11 times an hour, because I just don't fit that profile. But if you do some deeper reading, a secondary condition to a lot of traumatic brain injuries is obstructive sleep apnea. So that was another thing that
Mm-hmm.
was probably heavily lowering my hormone levels. So I was in the low 200s probably for about a decade, you know, possibly lower than that at times. And late 16, right before my son was born, I got on um, not a very well run regimen of hormone replacement therapy. I think I was on 200 milligrams every 2 weeks. And
Oh.
Yeah, if you can imagine. So just
Yeah.
doctors are very intelligent or well versed in some things doesn't mean that they have the optimal hormone replacement therapy regimen like at their fingertips. So that was the
Yeah.
first I learned. Wow, I'm really swinging around. Like I feel really good for a week. Like, I feel really good. Like I feel strong in the weight room. I've got good energy, and then I start to dwindle off, and I feel just like I did before. And
Yep.
so I sticked around with that for a little while, and eventually I found somebody that was more of a specialty skill set in hormones. Now I use Core Life Medical. Really big fan of their group, and I think they've probably done the best management of my hormone therapy. So,
Hmm.
so I'm on. I take 200 milligrams a week of test. They have
Hmm.
low dose of Clomid. They have me on a
Hmm.
dose anastrozole, which is an aromatase,
Hmm.
which I
Okay.
previously was not on because it gave me some side effects that weren't very favorable. But they convinced
Sure.
me to lower dose, and that really helped balance out the
Yeah.
estrogen and testosterone. And then I'm currently using a Somorelin peptide about
Okay.
5 days, and that's been better. For my deep sleep increased by 30-45 minutes a night just from
That's
that.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to be really careful with the anastrozole, because if you knock that estrogen down too low,
Oh,
where
dude.
that came from was the bodybuilding world, where these guys are taking 1,000 milligrams plus, a
Yeah.
week, and they're having to go on it because your estrogen needs to come up with your testosterone, because the estrogen is actually protective, and you have some god awful symptoms when you have low estrogen. And the thing that people don't understand about testosterone for men, the right dose is actually calming and centering, and it
Yeah.
makes hard work enjoyable. And for me, anyways, the dose that I've found works the best is about 200 milligrams a week, but I take like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday injection with an insulin needle, and that having that constant, steady level, because I started when I was in my about 25, and it was always like this big dose once a week, and I've learned that smaller dosage equals smaller dosages over a longer period of time equals less side effects, more sustained focus. And I think if you're listening to this and you were a football player, you were a wrestler, you've had a lot of head injuries, you can get all the sunshine you want. And, I was told the same thing. If you get enough sun, your testosterone will come back. Well, mine did not. So there's nothing worse than being below or at 200. And the sucky thing about it is the medical industry, as soon as you go over 200, they won't cover your testosterone anymore the minute you go over 200. So it's you definitely need to find somebody that's experienced in HRT and get on a protocol that suits you best. And it's great that you found somebody that's going based on your symptoms, because a lot of people look at labs, and some people respond to a little bit of testosterone well, and other people need more. So I'm glad that you've found that. Let's
Yeah.
talk about. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say the highest that I ever went was 250 a week, which doesn't
Yeah.
seem like an increase, and I could feel the difference. That was
Yes.
not focused. I was
Yeah.
more angry, and like
Mm-hmm.
the weights were something that I was turned to for that aggression. Um,
Sure.
so it wasn't giving back. So I lowered the dose,
Yeah.
and like you said, the
Smart.
free give injection 2 to 3 times a week, so much better than once a week. Leaps and
Yeah.
bounds better than 2 weeks.
Yep. Yeah. Every 2 weeks is a recipe for disaster. I that steady dose is great. And I would encourage you, if you're a dude and you've done all the lifestyle stuff and you're still feeling like garbage, go find yourself somebody who can help you out on that. The problem with most people with HRT, what happens is they feel like garbage, they're not sleeping, they're working too much, and then they get on HRT, and then they keep doing all the stuff that ended up getting them there. And same with peptides, with anything really. They don't address the underlying root causes, and then the testosterone or the peptides run out of therapeutic runway because you're not sleeping enough, you're not getting outside, you're not eating what you need to eat, you're not training, and then you end up having to up the dose, and then you end up getting in trouble. So let's talk about your transition into fatherhood, and how that's changed your approach to your business and your overall relationship, and what your priorities now are in your life.
Yeah. So being a father, amazing. You just being a parent in general it pushes you to way out of your comfort zone. And when you're raising your kids, you start to realize, do some reflecting on your own relationship with your parents. Happened to you as a child, get stirred back up. There's a lot of history or trauma you start unpacking when you have these little humans that you're trying to raise, because these things are just constantly brought to your attention. So things you see in your kids that remind you of you sometimes sweetly, and then things that remind you of you that makes you angry at yourself. And at times, resentful about your imperfections you passed on to your offspring.
Yeah.
The one bit of advice, I'm so glad that we were not able to have kids for 8 years, because we did a lot of work before the kids were ready to be in the picture. We had to be better versions of ourselves. And almost, because you pass on your genetics to your offspring. So if you're metabolically unhealthy, your kids will be metabolically unhealthy. It's not just habits that you're showing them. It's like their material you have to work with. So that was one thing that I was extremely grateful for. I think we probably did an even better job of cleaning up our lifestyle before the second kid came. And we waited about 4 years between kids as well. That wasn't like a planned timeline. That was enough time for my wife Jordan to heal, and her body to be ready for another pregnancy. There was one time a year before we got here where we were quote unquote trying, and it was just the biggest buzzkill. And as soon as we stopped trying, it just magically came.
Sure.
I don't know if that's happened to. So it's wonderful to be a father. It's wonderful to be a husband. It's like anything else, though. It's constant. It's constant work. It's constant check-in. It's constant management about how you can do the best job. And I feel like the best parents beat themselves up a lot because they're always trying to do better for their children.
Sure.
So if you're dude out there and you feel like you could be doing a better job as a father, you're probably doing a great job because you're constantly taking account into how you can raise your kids.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the moves you've made towards sustainability and, teaching your children resilience and kind of getting yourself kind of out of, obviously not totally abandoning the system, but doing some things to kind of set your family apart from this kind of chicanery that's currently going on.
So right now we're doing home learning, unschooling for the kiddos. We have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old about to turn 8. And he was in private school from the time he was like in pre-K or, right before that to kindergarten. And he did finish kindergarten with a private school. We tried to do another private school for first grade, and very quickly read the writing on the wall that this was not the right place for him. But in general, the way that schools are, what their priorities are and their goals for the kids are not in line with ours. So we took on, the responsibility. My wife does almost all the homeschooling. I help. I call myself I'm like a helper or like a TA, because there's a couple days of the week where I'm doing, more of the instruction. But she found the whole curriculum. She changes the curriculum as we need it changed, and she gets all the learning materials. Every day is a little different. Some people are very structured. We have a great space to do our home learning program, and she's reorganized our formal dining room area to be our schoolhouse room, and we do learning outside. It's been really trying. It's been a test of the family. There's a lot of togetherness because we're all around each other all the time. And if you have more than one kid, you just realize that 80% of the time they're fighting because they're learning conflict resolution and they're developing skill sets to deal with that. And it's not easy, but it's much better than the alternative, having no say in how your kids are being educated or what they're being, how they're being educated. So
I would use the word indoctrinated, not educated.
Yeah, and that's what it seemed like to us. So I feel good. I feel good that we can have an individual learning plan for our son Odin. And the faces, trying to learn in a traditional school model would have been impossible for him. it seemed impossible for me when I was younger, and I eventually adapted, as kids do. They're very adaptable, but that doesn't mean that they're thriving. Um,
Mhm.
so we just try to educate them how we would want to be raised, and we have the ability now to be able to do our core reading, writing, math, um, emotional, and then we have lots of time to be physical, and they have time to play, which is a huge requirement for kids because unstructured play is one of the best ways that they learn and figure things out. Um,
That's correct.
and just reading to your kids over and over again, having them read, having them write, and not stealing their joy of learning. Those are kind of our biggest goals with the program. More so than
Awesome.
is his math at second grade level? It seems like it's a little behind. Um, doesn't you can change and you can adapt so you can fit your kid because nobody knows your kid better than you do. So it's
Right.
not that you have traditional education and being an educator that would be helpful,
Right.
but you're certainly doing a lot better job than somebody that does not have a vested interest in your child that's being told how to
Mhm.
teach, and they have 25, 30 kids in the classroom, and they're trying to reach the median or the average. And school,
Right.
like we know, is not it's not a system that's built for boys, and I would argue
Correct.
it's not really built for girls either. They're just more adaptable at an earlier age.
Correct. Well, and the thing is too is that people don't realize is like I realized this very early in my education, my elementary education indoctrination. I realized really, really quickly that it wasn't about creating free thinkers. It wasn't about creating independence. It was about creating obedient workers and
Yes.
and people that basically would just fall in line and do whatever they're told and not question the narrative. And I just couldn't have anything to do with that, and that's why I pivoted into strength training because I still want to teach, but I don't want to be told how to teach. And children learn best through play. The problem with what we've done in the modern American education system is we've removed the play-based learning and the learning through osmosis, right? Having, dialogue with your child, reading to your child. That's how children learn. They're trying to teach preschoolers now how to read, and they're doing rote learning for that. And children don't learn that way. Their brain can't do that. They need to have their brain develop before they can go down that road. And then having practical skill sets, that's really the name of the game, particularly going down the road where we're headed. Do you guys do any kind of homeschool co-op or anything like that? And what have you noticed when you go out in public and your children in a public setting of how your children react and adapt and how they act compared to kids that are basically locked up inside of a zoo all day?
So we don't have any formal, like they do offer in the area like formal co-ops you can be a part of, where you do
Mhm.
education at different places, maybe 2 or 3 days a week, and then you do the rest of the educating on your own. We have a more informal relationship with a family that owns a farm. Um,
Cool.
Fire Hollow Farms is the name of the farm, and they offer just as volunteers on Fridays to do a nature study program for the kids. So
Awesome.
yesterday the kids went out there. Jordan took them out there. They do a 3 hour, usually a 3 hour day in the afternoon, and they did pumpkin carving, and they learned about the uses of pumpkin seeds and discards from your pumpkins.
Oh,
Learn
awesome.
about the animals and animal husbandry and how they serve their farm. They learn regenerative, the basic level of regenerative farming practices that they implement. They go through their garden. So this family is really wonderful because they open up their space and their home to other people that are not on a farm, so they can kind of get a taste of that lifestyle. So that's been a really good addition to what we're doing as far as education with books and training aids, and it's one of the other reasons why we were constantly looking for land and the right setup where we can have our kids raised in the country and show them the hardship and the growth that comes from that. So that's one of our
Yeah.
current goals. We're trying to acquire property right now, actually, so that we can do some homesteading and some hobby farming, and we can kind of make that a part of our self-sustainability to a point.
That's awesome. What have you noticed in the behavior differences of your children compared to some other kids?
Thanks for bringing that back around too. So a lot of people's fear when they when you mention, hey, we do homeschooling or we do home learning, is that your kids are going to be isolated. Your kids are going to be backwards, and they're not going to be able to, interact socially with peers, or people older or younger than them. And it's really like complete lunacy because they're not guarded or sheltered in a big prison-like structure all day. They are out in the real world. They're running errands with their parents. They're giving money for goods that they receive. We're, counting change together. They are talking to my clients that come to the house that are, that are much older than them, and they're holding their ground in conversation. They're providing good eye contact, humor. They're having conversations with people they would normally never come in contact with unless it was like a grandparent or aunt or uncle. In that perspective, I feel like they're better off when they're in that scenario than if they were in, like a public school system.
Yeah. Well, and they're not sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day.
No.
I've seen you with your kids. You have them in the gym. They're running around. They're doing what kids are supposed to do, which is play. And they're learning through osmosis, and you're teaching them real life skills. And that's really the name of the game. So, Kris, I thank you for being on. First of all, if you could give, if there's a man over, 40 who's really in a bad place, maybe they're overweight, maybe they've got some serious relationship issues, or they've got some performance issues, they've got diabetes, whatever else. What kind of advice would you give to them to get them going in the right direction?
First thing that I would probably tell them is start carving out the time, because the road you're going down requires a lot of work, and there's a lot of steps to it. So if you try to change everything at once, it's just destined for failure. But if you can find one or two habits or behaviors to change at a time, and you can dedicate 20 minutes a day to changing that behavior, whether it's, it's being more mindful about your food choices, or doing some planning on the weekends, or start taking your dog for a walk in the morning. You have to find some low barrier of entry to start moving and making those changes. And once you get a taste of that progress, you get hooked. So whether, if you're not into the weight room, maybe maybe you hike outside, or you find some nature activities, or you find a pickup sport of some kind. If you can get to where you're doing daily walks, or you're doing some kind of, and it sounds so cheesy to say that, like daily walks and meditation, but it's just like, that's what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to have 100 things rolling through our head at any given time. We don't get those opportunities anymore, so you have to create them. So, yeah, start working on your nutrition, start working on your sleep. If you have trouble with the fitness thing or getting in the weight room, maybe you do it at home. Maybe you recruit a buddy or a neighbor, because community is the reason that people will stick through things, and they can endure much greater hardship in numbers, because there'll be many times where you don't want to dedicate the time to doing any of it. And you have that, I hate to use the term accountability, but if there's more at stake when it's not just on you. So whether it's you and your wife, or it's you and a buddy, or you and your neighbors, I think that having some kind of community to support the lifestyle that you're trying to get into, I think is probably one of the biggest.
Awesome. That's great advice. You have to start where you are. A lot of people that I've worked with over the years, it's like they're in Tampa Bay and they want to go to Montana. They want to go to Glacier, which is a great place, but they want to start in St. Louis, and you just can't. It just doesn't work that way. So, yeah. Kris, tell people about what you do and where they can find you. One of the things I'm proudest of you about is that you've stayed in touch with the military community. You do a lot of work with people that have served in the military, and my hat's off to you with that. You've got a very wide range of clients that you do a really good job with. So tell people where they can find you and what you basically do.
Yeah. So my name, Kris Freeman, Kris, Freeman, Freeman. Kris Freeman at Instagram. I don't post there a ton. So we could probably link my referral link through Barbell Logic, which is my online training space. So that's remote training is done through that company. Fantastic crew, a really good system. And then in person, we can give you the location of our gym here in Versailles, Kentucky. If you're ever stopping through the area, or if you know anybody local that needs some help with strength conditioning done intelligently and adapted to their needs, be happy to help.
Great. Thank you so much. If you could send that stuff over to me, that'd be wonderful. We'll put it in the notes. Thanks for being on. Make sure you stick around for a second when we're done. But thanks for being part of the Vitality Brotherhood podcast. If you want to join a community where I'm here to help you, we're here to help you get yourself in a better place or maintain where you currently are, just go to vitalitybrotherhood.com. I have a free community. Get in there, get to know people, get to know guys that basically want to get themselves in a better place. They're either in a bad place, they want to get to a better place, so they want to maintain their vitality so they can continue to chase excellence. Kris, thanks again for being on, and stick around after we end this.